Welcome back to the Childhood Cancer Perspective, and thank you all for sticking with me through this entire journey. One of the greatest opportunities and pleasures that I have is being able to share other family stories, because I realize that what we do on a daily basis, what we go through, what we become, how our lives change, is not what we see or what we're force-fed from the media. So I want everybody to be able to speak on exactly the way pediatric cancer is behind the scenes, what you don't see. So today, my guest is Mirisa, and she's going to share her story of her son Ozzy and his journey with pediatric cancer, or as my wife would call it, a shit show. But she is going to be able to kind of use her own words and explain this journey from behind the scenes. So thank you so much for being with me, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks for doing this and just giving everyone the opportunity for something like this. Again, my name's Mirisa. I'm a first-time mom. So I had Ozzy on August 1st of 2023. Had a really hard time with postpartum depression. In February of 2024, I actually quit my job because of it. Ozzy was about 7 months at that time, or no, excuse me, about 6 months at that time. Things started getting better, and then in May of 2024, beginning of May of 2024, Ozzy was 9 months old, and he started showing symptoms of just being sick. Just regular kind of flu-like, maybe a little virus symptoms. Normal, didn't think too much of it. And then we had family members start kind of recognizing that, he didn't look too well. He started being just really, really tired. And I mean tired, not just taking more naps. I mean, like, he just wanted to sleep. He wasn't playing, and he would just lay in your arms, which wasn't usually normal for him. He was a very, very, like, playful kid. And so that was kind of like the first alarm. And then the second was he didn't want to feed. He was kind of still learning to eat solid foods, and he didn't ever seem really into them, which some kids aren't. Again, first time mom, didn't think too much of it. But then he didn't want to breastfeed, which was completely not normal, of course. Hopefully this part isn't too much information, but bowel movements it was not normal whatsoever. And at one point, which really raised a red flag, was he went to the bathroom and he had something in his diaper that I had no idea what it was, but it was not normal. A couple people said maybe it was like undigested milk, and that was the first thing where I was like, okay, I need to call the doctors because I don't know what this is. And he hasn't been eating hardly anything, so it shouldn't look like this. So about 10 to 12 days before Ozzy's diagnosis, made an appointment. We couldn't get into his regular pediatrician, so we just said whichever one is first available, we want to see them. Perfect. Went and seen him. He said Ozzy's symptoms just seemed like a viral infection. He didn't look twice at I actually saved what came out of Ozzy's diaper because I wanted answers as to what it was. And so I put it in a plastic baggie, took it to the pediatrician. He didn't give two looks at it and said it's undigested milk. And it didn't sit right with me. I was extremely, extremely frustrated after that appointment because I felt like he just kind of brushed us off. I may have been a first-time mom, but I knew this wasn't just a virus. So he said, give it a few more days and he should start feeling better. I said, fine. Me and my husband took Ozzy, we came home, and then that was on a Monday. A couple of days had passed. By that Friday, he still was getting worse. Again, extremely tired. Another telltale sign was he had night sweats, and I mean, he was drenched in sweat. And it was May. I'm in California. It is hot, but not to the point where my son should be, in a puddle of sweat in the middle of the night when we have fans going, air going, cool pajamas. It just didn't make any sense. And then a couple more alarming things started happening. It wasn't urinating hardly at all. Again, maybe because he wasn't breastfeeding so much. Just little things like this were happening each day more and more. And then some really concerning things, such as he started getting nosebleeds out of nowhere. Didn't hit his nose, nothing, just started having nosebleeds. Didn't really know a reason for it. And then he ended up getting I don't even know if I can pronounce this, but like a hemorrhage in his eye, a subconjunctival hemorrhage in his eye. And me and my husband were sitting at dinner and we just kind of watched it happen. So he didn't hit his head, didn't hit his eye. We just started to see it looked a little red, And then within the next hour or two, his whole eye was just, it looked completely bloody and it looked terrifying. And we didn't know what the heck that was. And then he ended up having blood in his diaper, in a clean diaper. No poop, no pee, but he had spots of blood in his diaper. And then he had petechiae like along his ears a little bit as well. All of these signs individually didn't seem too alarming, but all put together, now looking back, we were just kind of like, how did we not make this connection? But again, when you're a parent, you don't think, oh, my son has, or my child has all these symptoms. I think he has leukemia. Let me go take him to the hospital. So those things started happening. And then he also started having bruising. And I mean, not a bruiser here, one or two on his leg or anything. I mean, his legs were covered in bruises. If you barely poked him, automatic bruise, and it looked horrible. And honestly, my first thought was, when I take him to the hospital, they're going to call protective services on us. And I don't know what to say other than, I don't know how this is happening. Maybe he's anemic, because I struggle with anemia. So I said maybe it's something with that too. But nevertheless, by Friday night, he got much worse. We ended up taking him to our local emergency room department. It's for adults, children. It's not like a children's hospital. So we took him there. They wanted his diaper off to weigh him. We took his diaper off. He had blood in his diaper. Showed the doctor. Basically, the ER doctor shrugged us off, said it's a virus. And at that point, I was beyond furious, because I said, there's no way. This is not viral symptoms whatsoever. And we ended up getting an appointment. We went home that night. We got an appointment with his actual pediatrician on that Monday, May 22nd of 2024. Went to see her, and she came in, took one look at him and said, it's not viral. I don't know what it is, but something's obviously not right. She asked if the emergency department completed lab work on Ozzy, and we told her they did not. They said they didn't feel it necessary to do blood work, especially on children. They, I guess, whatever reason, they don't like to do. So she was really, really upset about that. Another symptom she noticed he had was his stomach was extremely bloated, and it looked like someone stuck like a pump in his stomach and pumped his stomach up, and it was so hard. It just, yeah, it did not look normal. So she was thinking that maybe his intestines had twisted and it was going to be something surgical. So when we left there, the plan was for us to go back to the hospital to get lab work done on Ozzy. As I put Ozzy in the car, was getting ready to drive off, the medical assistant ran outside of the clinic as fast as she could, came running towards the car and said, the doctor changed her mind. She called the children's hospital. She wants you to go straight to the children's hospital in Sacramento right now. She already called them. They're waiting for Ozzy. And then I lost it. Called my husband, and he took off work, said he was going to go meet us there. We went there. When we went to go check in, the nurse at the front desk looked at Ozzy and said, does he normally look like that? And we said no. And she said, something's not right. And I said, great. So she rushed us back to the actual emergency department in the children's hospital, or in the children's ward. We were sitting there waiting. Eventually they put us in a room, and it was two people in the room. We were on one side and another family was on the other, and we were just separated by a curtain. And doctor came in, did his regular checks. He checked his eye, asked us all the questions. We're going through everything. And he said he wanted an x-ray of his stomach because it was so extended out and bloated. And then they were also going to do lab work. Came in, did lab work. Mind you, right now, Ozzy's acting normal at this point. He's sitting there. They brought in toys and bubbles for him to play with, and I'm sitting on the hospital bed with him while he's playing, interacting, is alert, everything. But look-wise, he looked horrible, and he looked gray, and he looked yellow. His color was extremely off. And sat there waiting. It was me, my husband, and my mom. And then we seen the x-ray tech came to open the door, and at that same time, right before she opened the door, the ER doctor met her at the door and closed it and shook his head at her and said something that looked like along the lines of basically like, we're not going to do this right now. And the ER tech left, and me and my husband looked at each other, and then I think at that point we kind of knew something was going on. So ER tech left, doctor came in. They ended up removing the other family on the other side of the curtain into a different room and didn't think much of it. ER doctor came in, sat down, and gave us the dreaded words no parent wants to hear, and just said, I'm really sorry, but Ozzy's lab work came back and he has leukemia. And Me and my mom lost it. I honestly don't even remember what my husband was doing, but I think he was just like, what the hell. And doctor gave us a couple of minutes to kind of get ourselves together before letting us know what the plan was. And me and my husband were like, do we go home now and come back and meet with an oncologist? Like what? And the ER doctor said, no, you're going upstairs. You're not going home. And when we got all the lab work, Ozzy's white blood cell count was 65,000. And to put it in perspective, anything over 11,000 is considered alarming or abnormal. His hemoglobin was 5.7, which explained why he was so pale and tired also. And his platelets were 10. That's just extremely, extremely low. So he said, no, you're going upstairs. So they went and got a wheelchair. They had me put a blanket over Ozzy when I carried him because he was, looking back, I didn't know why. But now looking back, it was because he was so susceptible to just picking up any type of little virus that could have been life-threatening to him at that point. So we had to be wheeled from the ER. We went upstairs to get situated. Honestly, that first night is just kind of a huge blur. Me and my husband had absolutely nothing with us other than my purse, and my husband was still in his work clothes from the day. And we just, we were surrounded by a team of nurses coming in. They were poking, prodding my 9-month-old son. They had him get blood, they had him get platelets, a ton of antibiotics. Just, I honestly can't even say everything that they did to him that night, but it was a lot. And that night, me and my husband took turns sleeping upright in a hospital chair. It was the most uncomfortable thing ever. Well, I don't even think we really got any sleep that night. But that happened. Ozzy's platelets were so low that first night, that I remember when they were doing the IV, the nurse was having a hard time because he's 9 months old. He's squirming around, even though I'm trying to hold him as tight as possible to get an IV in him. And I was completely covered in his blood. There was blood squirting everywhere. There was blood all over the nurse because his platelets were so low that it couldn't clot. So it was just coming out and coming out and coming out. Eventually, they had to call IV therapy that night to come and help them get the IV in. Did what they did. First night passed. Second day came is when we, first thing in the morning, got to meet with one of his oncologists. He had 2 oncologists initially to start with. So he took me and my husband in the room. He said he suspected a specific type of leukemia he had, but he didn't want to let us know what it was until we did a bone marrow biopsy to be sure and confirm that. I don't know anything he explained to us that day, honestly. My husband is very, very into science, and I looked at him the whole time, hoping that he was registering everything the doctor was telling us, because he was going into the scientific details of what exactly was happening in Ozzy's body, and it was a blur to me at that point, because all I hear is, your son has cancer. The one thing I do remember the doctor saying was that it is very treatable. He has a very rare cancer. It's leukemia, but it's an infant leukemia, which is extremely rare, and it's one of the most aggressive, harder to treat forms of leukemia anytime it happens under the age of 1. But he said there is a treatment plan for it, and it is treatable, which that stuck in my head because I said, that's great. So after that, they sent us to a bigger room because we found out we were going to be there for at least 6 weeks. So that was our new home. We moved into a bigger room, got settled in, got used to the hospital life. Ozzy went in to do his bone marrow biopsy the next day, and he also ended up getting a double lumen Broviac placed, which tube in his chest. He had 2 lines hanging out. That was really rough because it was handing your 9-month-old baby to a surgeon and doctors, hoping he's going to make it out of surgery alone. And he's getting things placed in his body and you're not even really sure, understand what those things are, but all you know is they need it to save his life, so you have to agree to it. It was a lot, definitely. So Ozzy got his bone marrow biopsy, we got the results back, and doctor confirmed it was infant B-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Again, told us we were going to be there for 6 weeks, which they were starting chemotherapy right away that day. Got him started on chemotherapy. That was the whole first plan of treatment that we were going to be in. He said basically also the first year you're going to be in the hospital because they need to monitor him for each chemo cycle. So for the first year, every single chemotherapy treatment, we were in the hospital. For all of 2024 and beginning of 2025, we were in the hospital. I think each month I spent maybe about a weekend to maybe 2 weekends a month at home. The rest at the hospital. That's where me and my son lived. I think another thing people don't realize is like the financial aspect. Everyone knows that yes, you are going to have a lot of medical bills. You're probably going to have medical debt. We have private insurance through my husband's work. And even with that, things still get very, very expensive. And with my husband specifically, since he took off that parent bonding leave you get, it was about 6 weeks here in California that my husband got when Ozzy was born. However, Ozzy being only 9 months old, he was still within that first year of life basically where my husband didn't qualify to take off any other type of leave, whether it was medical leave, parental leave, bonding leave, any type of leave. So my husband's work thankfully allowed him to take off as much time as he needed to be with me and Ozzy while we were in the hospital dealing with this life-changing event. And it was unpaid, unfortunately, but I am very thankful that they even gave him that chance because I don't know what I would have done if it was just me and Ozzy being in that hospital ourselves during those 6 weeks. So we made it work. 6 weeks came and went. That was May 22nd of 2024 was his diagnosis date. We went home the first week of July. Typically, the doctors like to have them in remission within the first 30 days. Ozzy didn't reach remission until August 4th of 2024. At that point, they detected no cancer cells. However, with leukemia, because it is aggressive and it does have such a high chance of it coming back in a short amount of time, especially, the doctor let us know that yes, he's in remission, but you know what? He's going to be under treatment for a minimum of 2 years. So we're looking at May 3rd of 2026 is going to be our end date. And I just remember thinking, how is this going to be our life for the next 2 years? There's absolutely no way. That just sounds insane to us. But we were in survival mode. We're still in survival mode, but things are a lot more manageable now. Every chemo cycle, pretty much that first year, we were in the hospital. In a weird way, that just kind of became our normal, honestly. So it was, yeah, let's pack our bags. We're going to the hospital. We're getting admitted. We'll probably be home in about a week or two. That's it. My husband continued to work because he became our sole provider, and he also had to continue working to keep up Ozzy's insurance. So it was mainly me and my son. It was during the daytime, me and him, and then evening time, I was lucky enough to have my mom with me at every single hospital stay after that, which was really great. And it was just a lot of getting to know all these big, scary chemotherapy names and antibiotics. And, I've never been a science person or a medical person, and I can remember and name and spell every single one of Ozzy's chemotherapies that he's ever had. And it's just really crazy to think about all the things you really remember and all the treatments and just all the protocols you really start to understand and just memorize, and it becomes so normal. But yeah, basically that first year in the hospital, we ended up getting to fast forward to about June of 2025, so this year, just a few months ago. We got through the most intense frontline treatment. We were going into maintenance treatment, the final phase, which everyone says that's such a huge milestone, and it is. That's usually the phase where doctors say kids can go back to school, they can start to be around everybody. They can pretty much be normal kids. For Ozzy, we ended up getting our maintenance delayed because the month we were supposed to start maintenance was also when the doctors decided to last minute change his treatment plan, and they added in a newly approved immunotherapy. Had no idea what immunotherapy was, didn't understand anything of it. I thought we were going to the last phase of treatment. I had questioned, is the current treatment not working? Is that why you're adding this in? Like, what's going on? And so it was a new immunotherapy called, I just call it Blina, but I know there's multiple names for it. But it's basically a bag that Ozzy was hooked up to 24/7 for 28 days. So at that point, Ozzy was about Oh gosh. He was about like 23, no, excuse me. He was about 21, 22 months old, almost 2 years old. A very, very active kid. And being attached to a bag 24/7 in the hospital was extremely hard. Now, being able to do it at home sounded nice at first, but when you have a very, very active kid and to have them be hooked up to something like that was extremely stressful. But that new immunotherapy has increased Ozzy's chances of survival, so we decided to move forward with it. Doctors wanted him to get at least one round of it, so we just said okay. We did one more hospital stay. However, this time Ozzy was admitted to the ICU because what we were told was the first few days of starting this immunotherapy it can cause a lot of scary symptoms or reactions, such as seizures. They want to look for extreme tiredness. For Ozzy ended up getting tremors. He got the highest fevers I've ever seen him have. He lost his ability to walk. He couldn't stand. It was extremely scary to the point where I almost called it off. And I had called one of his oncologist doctors in and said, is this even worth it? Because I don't want to fry his brain, basically, because it was just so scary to watch him go through that. And unfortunately, some of those things were pretty normal when you are starting blina. I think that's another thing that's really scary, is thinking about the families who do clinical trials and things like this. You're putting a lot of faith into medicine, into something you don't really know or maybe can fully 100% trust. And you're, in a sense, you might be kind of using your kid as a guinea pig in hopes that it saves their life. And that's kind of what I felt like. But we have to put our trust in these teams of doctors, hoping that they're going to save your kid's life, basically. So Ozzy ended up doing that. He completed his 28-day cycle of the blina, and we ended up moving on to maintenance, which is the phase that we're in now, thankfully. Ozzy still has a few months left of treatment. We're about to hit our last 6 months of treatment, which I never thought, honestly, this time would come. I remember thinking it was so far away when they told us 2 years, and he has done very well, knock on wood. He's pretty much responded as well as they could have to treatment. It's just, yeah, I think it's just something that definitely changes your life. There's so many things about childhood cancer, and regardless if you can have two kids have the same cancer and both of their stories can be vastly different from one another. No story, regardless if it's the same cancer, is going to be the same. Treatment plans are going to be different from every child, and it's just, yeah, it's crazy thinking back of everything that Ozzy has been through. Just how many surgeries, how many chemotherapies has been put in his body for how little he was is also just mind-blowing. Once Ozzy finishes treatment, he will still be seen every single month for the first year. The second year, he's going to be seen every 2 months. The third year, he's going to be seen every 3 months. Fourth year, every 4 months. And the fifth year, he'll be seen twice a year. And after that, he'll be seen once a year until he's 21. So this is until he is well into adulthood, that he will always be checked to see if there's any relapse happening, if it's going to cause a secondary cancer. Unfortunately, that's another thing with childhood cancer, is a lot of these chemotherapies, you do have a chance of relapse, but you also have a chance of it causing a secondary cancer, which is always concerning. Unfortunately, though, this is our life, and we have to adjust to it, and this is our new normal, honestly. And we just try to look at the positive as best we can, that, yes, he got cancer, but he responded as well as he could to treatment, and we just take things day by day with him. And I'm just thankful enough that he is healthy enough to at least be home to take chemotherapy. Even though it's scary, he's well enough to not have to be in the hospital to do it. And we do have an end date of treatment, which is also very exciting, and it is in, here just a few months. But overall, I think it's just really important for parents to show their personal stories. You hear all these commercials from other hospitals like St. Jude's and everything, which amazing hospital, by the way, no knock to them, but you see pictures and videos of kids, who have cancer on those. And I think it's important for parents to show their personal stories of what they go through. because there's a lot more to it than, just kids losing their hair and having to take chemo. It completely changes families' lives, literally, within a matter of a few words of a doctor telling you, this diagnosis. And you have to completely adjust to a new life and learn a lot about something you never thought would have to be your reality, unfortunately. And I think it's just really important to, again, share your personal story and raise awareness for your kids, because the things they go through are just, I mean, it's unacceptable of what they have to go through, regardless if, they're 9 months old like Ozzy or whether they're 18 years old. It's not okay whatsoever.
I think
Gosh,
I know it's a lot, right? And when you go back and
it is. Yeah.
you live it every day, and it becomes kind of like, I don't want to say robotic, but you just kind of go through the motions, and you become immersed in that life because that's what you have to do as a mom, as a dad. That's your job. And so you forget all the little details, but once you start talking about them, it's incredible. Like even things maybe you had maybe even forgotten that you went through, and unfortunately reliving it by telling the story. But like you said, and I think we agree 100% on this, is that what you see and what the media shows you is a very, very small snippet, and I almost think a false market of what we go through and what these kids go through. Because once those cameras go off, right, once the hospital door closes to your room, it's a lot different. It's nonstop, round robin of nurses, of doctors coming in. And if you're in the ICU and you're over 5 feet tall, good on you, because there's no room to move in those rooms at all. And there's generally 15 people at one time that come in. But I want to touch on one thing before we kind of move on, and that is a common misconception. And I think you can speak to this because you're coming up on that end of treatment, right? The end of the treatment plan. The common misconception would be then, once his treatment is finished, he's good, right? He's done. He's okay. He can move on with his life. Everything is good. I would argue in this sense, obviously, our cases are a little bit different. I think a lot of things line up with the way that the diagnosis came with our story as well. With the one thing that I will say also is, especially to the moms, always trust your gut and always go with it. Whether you're a first-time mom, a three-time, your gut is going to tell you so much that you go with. And you did that. And so good on you for doing that and realizing that there's something more going on that you needed to get figured out. But that common misconception is that once treatment is over or their hair grows back, everything's good. And people, and honestly, support will start to move away because they'll think, okay, they're done. So on that day when, okay, you ring the bell, treatment's over, you're going home, here's your notebook of everything you've been through and what you've got to do. Is the fight really over at that moment for you guys? Like, what does life look like from the day the treatment ends, the planned treatments, to moving forward in life? Like, you already know how much you're going to be having to check in and do MRIs or see all that kind of stuff, but what does life look like truly after treatment ends?
Yeah, and the first thing I'll touch on is the whole trusting your gut instinct. Thankfully to social media, I've been able to connect with so many other moms. And something so common that I've heard is I kept getting told it's a virus, it's a virus, it's a virus, and it wasn't. And that just seems so appalling to me that so many people have taken their kids to hospitals and they're getting told the same thing, and if a lot of parents didn't trust their gut and kept pushing for answers, our ER doctor told us if we came in a few days later, it would have been a much different story. Now, I didn't question what exactly he meant by when he said that, but I had a pretty good understanding of what he meant by that, and judging by all of Ozzy's symptoms at that point. What virus causes a child to bleed from, in his diaper, and nosebleeds and ears and just all of that? And I think that's the thing is, yes, parents, moms, dads, caregivers, if you really don't feel like something is right or your kid's getting better, keep pushing for answers. Take them to the emergency room. I think my biggest thing was, if you have a children's hospital near you, which this probably sounds crazy, but I didn't even realize children's emergency rooms were a thing. I thought an emergency room is an emergency room, not thinking that there was an emergency room just for kids who specialize in kids. So maybe they have a much better understanding, which they did. But my biggest thing is, if you're not getting answers, see if you have a children's hospital near you and take them there. A lot of things I've heard from other people not in the childhood cancer world is emergency rooms are for emergencies. Your child didn't have an emergency. You were just went there to get blood work done. And it was, yes, I needed blood work done because that's what's going to confirm that my kid had cancer. And look what happened. I would have much rather have went to the emergency room and have them giving us lab work and me gotten a $4,000 bill just for lab work if that told me that my child didn't have cancer. I don't care about that. Emergency rooms are there if you're not getting answers, if you need something right away, if your kid is not feeling well and you truly believe something is wrong, I'm going to take my kid there, and that's what I did. But unfortunately, I didn't get the answers initially. Thankfully, eventually I did. And then, yeah, the other misconception is that when I actually told a lot of people, friends and family who were following our story, that once Ozzy hit a clinical remission, which the doctors call it, in August of 2024, just about 2-3 months after diagnosis, it was, oh, that's awesome. I'm great to hear he's cancer free. And then people started dropping off. And I had a close friend reach out and say, oh, how's Ozzy doing? And I said, he's doing really great. This is what's going on right now. This is chemo. We're back in the hospital. And it was, I thought he still has to go through chemo. Like, I thought he didn't have any cancer cells anymore. And then that's when you have to explain that, no, he's in a clinical remission. However, he still has to go through this treatment. And the same goes for, like you said, when we end treatment, even when his hair grew back, he's still getting chemotherapy. He may not look like a cancer kid right now, but he's still in the fight for his life regardless. And when treatment ends, yes, he gets to ring the bell. Yes, we will start to get to live a normal life. We keep Ozzy completely isolated. We do not take him out anywhere. Partially because, we never really know what his numbers look like on a day-to-day basis. When I say numbers, I mean his blood counts, so we don't know how easy it is for him to be able to fight off an infection if he does get sick. So we are very, very safe with him. And also, Ozzy didn't finish his vaccinations because he got sick so young. And we don't know what the chemotherapy has killed, has not killed as far as his vaccinations. That's something that we will have to readdress after he finishes treatment with his actual pediatrician. And then that's something that we know when time comes, obviously, we'll feel more comfortable taking him out in public and things like that. But yes, when he rings that bell, the fight is not over with. And I joke with my husband, but I'm also serious that when he rings that bell, that's when I'm going to enroll in therapy. Because that's when I feel like it's going to be even more scary in a sense. Right now, we're kind of on a breather, I feel like. We've been through this for almost 2 years at this point, 1.5 years right now. We have a routine going. We know his medications. We know his doctors. We know what to look out for. We know how to read his test results. This is our normal, and that is what it is. But when he rings that bell and that treatment ends, we go from seeing his oncology team on a weekly basis to seeing them once a month. So out of those 29 days or 31 days out of the month and only seeing them once a month, I tell my husband that's going to be really scary because we're not going to know his numbers on a weekly basis. What if within a matter of 2 weeks, cancer cells start coming back and we don't know until a month passes and we get some lab work done? And I think that's a great point to bring up is kids ring that bell and it doesn't mean everything goes back to normal. Like I said, Ozzy is going to be monitored till he's 21 years old, and he's 2 years old right now. That is an extremely long time. Ozzy's so used to his nurses. His nurses are his friends. He gets so excited to see his nurses, and he's 2 years old, and he knows when they check his temperature. He knows when it's time for them to access his port. He knows, take your shirt off. He tells them to clean it. He sits there and he gets on my lap and he holds my hands and he just braces for them to, push the needle into his skin. It's just amazing how much kids end up getting used to stuff like this and what they know is their routine. And he knows, it's time for me to take my medicine. And he'll walk around, and as sad as this is, I try to look at the positive and say, wow, Ozzy is so smart and he has grown so much despite all the crap that has been put into his body. But he'll take syringes that we have and he'll go around giving medicine to all his little toys. And it's like, that's really shitty for my 2-year-old to have to do and know how to do that and what that means. But I'm also just really thankful that he's growing up and just being able to attain stuff like that and just being so smart with kind of recognizing things like that. But yeah, I mean, overall, yeah, the fight, it doesn't stop when his hair grows back or when he rings the bell, but we're just, going to take it day by day and adjust accordingly, and we know what to watch out for. We know the chances, the reality of what could potentially happen within those first 5 years after treatment, which those first 5 years are going to be the most critical after treatment, if he happens to relapse, knock on wood. And I think that's another thing is you just have to be, as a parent, you really have to understand things like that and really think about that, hey, this is my kids' chances of survival, but for me, I have to know the nitty gritty statistics, percentages, things like that, as crappy as they are. I need to know that for my own comfort. Whereas, like, my husband doesn't want to know those percentages. And, that's another thing with childhood cancer is, it can change relationships with family and friends. A lot of things that seem to have mattered before don't matter anymore, or don't seem to matter as much. But you have to be very, very open, and you have to talk about a lot of sometimes dark things when it comes to childhood cancer. And that's just another thing to talk about is once treatment finishes, what does our life really look like after this? What are the chances? And basically when he finishes treatment, seeing the oncology doctor is just going to be like going to see his pediatrician, and that is what it is, but we're going to enjoy it, and we're going to take it day by day, and we'll just let Ozzy live his life. And we're extremely excited to be able to just start taking him places and letting him be a kid, honestly. Taking him to Disneyland, taking him to the movies, taking him to Disney on Ice, taking him to the park, just letting him play with other kids. People don't understand fully what it means to not being able to have your kid not interact with other kids, not have a social life at all. And I think that's extremely hard. And it's, oh, well, let's just take him to the store really quick, or, let's take him to the playground. And people don't realize that that can be extremely life-threatening for your kid. And it's not that simple. And that's, I think, another thing is there's so much, you can go in depth so much explaining how, severe things can be for your child to people, but there's just so much information to attain and to process that sometimes it just doesn't feel necessary to explain it to people, because it's taken me a long time to even have to process things. And I think unless you're in the childhood cancer world, you will never fully understand what things like that mean for our kids.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, we want a lot more people to listen, right? We want a lot more people to not understand how we feel. I always want to make it really clear that we don't want you to understand how we feel, because that means you're involved in it too. That means that you've heard those same words. But we want you to hear us and understand how important it is what we're trying to do every day. And, you go through a lot to protect your child growing up, to ensure that bad things don't happen. And when this happens, you are on an island and you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. And that really takes it's a learning curve. And every single parent that goes through this, we have close friends, and they've all done it differently than us. And none of it's right or wrong, but it's a learning curve to figure out what you're supposed to do. Sometimes you have to tell people, unfortunately, you can't be around us right now because we're going to take every precaution. And we did that. Our daughter was diagnosed in January of 2020, and it literally, when COVID was the pandemic to end all pandemics, and that was it. We were in the hospital in January. In March, the world shut down. And at that point, we're isolated from everybody, which in a slight way was a blessing, because then it was like we're all isolated and you're not just being taken out of school and being taken away from your friends. So if you have to find a silver lining in this, that was at that moment, that was ours. But the support is something that I've talked about many times amongst the podcast, on my social media. The support changes. It absolutely changes based on the information that people have to digest. And if it's, their hair is growing back, okay, well, that means they must be okay. You're ending your treatment, or you rang the bell, that means that they must be okay. Or the ever popular one, the one that has affected me the most especially, is the people that don't know how to talk to you because they feel like either they're going to say the wrong thing and upset you, or that cancer is contagious, and so they don't know what to say, so they just disappear. it's the worst thing you can do, because the support we need, and like you said too, and I think the fight really begins when the treatment ends, because that's when you're, unfortunately, and I would say, I don't want to put the ideas in your head, but I'm sure they're already there. You're on edge, right? You're on edge every day that something's going to happen. What is that? What's that new bruise? What is that cough? What is, it's an unfortunate side effect that you're forever living with for the rest of your life and the rest of his life as he moves into adulthood and everything, that everything is going to be scary. And if you have other children, it's the same thing. Why did they got a bruise? Why are they coughing? And it's unfortunate. But this thing, not only, like you said, it does affect those friendships, it affects that support. And unfortunately, it can destroy marriages. It can destroy families because of what you're going through. 80% of marriages do not survive pediatric cancer. And it's not because, and I will put this 100%, it is not because the love stops. It's because you change. What you go through, what you see, how you deal with it, your grief, and you can have grief even if your child is still with you. You can have the grief of that time lost and all of that. Everything affects you in a different way, and how you choose to deal with it. You mentioned, at some point the therapy starts, right? And I've never gone to therapy. My wife has never gone to therapy, but we know we probably should do it at some point in our lives. I use this, and I use social media as my therapy, because I feel like talking about it is the best way for me to let out feelings that normally I wouldn't probably talk about. But we have to normalize being okay with talking about this, and even the nasty stuff, the stuff that nobody wants to hear, the stuff we don't see on TV, right? We all have, and it's not for any other reason other than you're documenting your life and your journey, but we all have those images. I know I do, on my phone of JC when she was going through her treatments, that I can't show on social media because they'll get kicked and I'll get blocked, I'll get banned, all of that stuff. But it's the reality. It's honestly the reality. And I truly believe that if commercials showed exactly what's going on with pediatric cancer, and they mimicked the commercials that we see for animals that are abused and left outside, you would have so much more support. Yeah, it would be hard to look at. It absolutely is hard to look at. It's probably the reason why we have all the animals in this house now, is because of those kinds of commercials that make us feel horrible for the way animals are treated. But what about our kids? Like, they are literally our only future, and they get left behind. And that's why this podcast was started. That's why our social media was started. That's why our nonprofit was started, because we wanted to ensure that enough people could hear what we've got going on behind the scenes. Because much like I think yourself and so many others out there, unless you're immersed in this, unless you know somebody, you will listen. I was ignorant to the fact that there were pediatric cancer floors on children's hospitals, or just hospitals in general. You go in as a kid, you grow up, you skin your knee, you break a leg, whatever. You don't realize that maybe 6, 7 floors up, there's kids that are fighting for their lives up there, and you have no idea, because it's not a fun thing to televise, which is why we don't hear about it enough. But our stories are so important, because our kids deserve to have their legacy, no matter what it is, solidified and secured, because what they're going to put into this world, we're missing out on, we're losing, and it's not fair. And obviously in our situation, we lost our daughter at 8 years old, and that means that's all of those years of life that we're never going to get to see her do the things that she should have been able to do. Never going to get to see her graduate and move on in life and have a boyfriend and run a business, whatever. We're never going to get to see that. What Ozzy's going through right now, all the time in treatment, is time lost that he should have just been being a kid, and growing up and getting into stuff and driving mom and dad crazy as a child, as a toddler, right? The normal stressful things. We can't have glass objects low to the ground because we'll pull them off and break them, or we'll get into this stuff. That's the kind of thing we should be worrying about. Not we're going to your next treatment. He shouldn't be excited to see his nurses. It's good that he's normalized that to the point of, it's not scary for him, but that shouldn't be his best friends. You know what I mean? And that's I don't like to think about that. I hate that, because it's good for him, but terrible at the same time. And, it's unfortunate that our stories, again, every time I talk to another parent, the stories always start out the same. The diagnosis was delayed, because nobody's looking for, like my wife would say, nobody's looking for the zebra. They're looking for just horses. They're not looking for that one case. And I get it. right? I get it that pediatricians and ER doctors aren't saying, okay, the kid's bruising, it's got to be cancer. The kid has distended stomach, it's got to be cancer, right? You're looking for other, and I get that. You also don't want to scare parents by going to that worst case, but we've also got to be okay with understanding that we should be looking there just to make sure and not casting things off. Our daughter, it was months of being told it was constipation until we finally got the diagnosis of brain cancer. And like, yeah, you don't put those two together. But my wife also felt like she was being watched and that they were thinking that she was hurting our daughter. And that's why she was in the ER so much we were going to other ERs, other doc, whatever, because you don't want to, because she felt like it. And parents shouldn't be made to feel like that. You're just trying to protect your child.